Everyone. Can you hear me okay? Well, good to be back in church again. So much easier to teach from here than it is from home. But we're continuing in Daniel, and last week, I don't know if you got a chance to see the live stream, but we were talking about the handwriting on the wall, and I went through the first 12 verses of chapter 5, and we were talking about the fact that this hand just appeared during this festival that Belshazzar was having, and we kind of went through the fact that he was very well shocked, and for some reason he wasn't aware of Daniel. I guess Daniel was in retirement. So we're picking up at verse 13, and where Daniel has been called, his most people believe his grandmother, would be Nebuchadnezzar's wife, was still alive, and that she was telling her grandson basically that this man Daniel was good at interpreting things because he couldn't understand what this writing on the wall was. And so Daniel's been called, and that's where we're picking up the story. So starting here in verse 12, for as much as excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams. Let me start again because I forgot to turn the record button on. For as much as excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now not to be confused, these two names are very, very similar. In fact, I think there's only a couple of letters difference, meaning Belshazzar and Belteshazzar, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now Daniel being called, he will show the interpretation. And that's where we left off last week. Verse 13. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judea, whom the king my father brought out of jewelry? I have even heard of thee that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. You'll notice that gods there is in little g. That's the pagan gods of Babylon. Notice it's pluralized. They had quite a few of them. And so that even Nebuchadnezzar took a while to get used to the idea of a one true God versus multiple gods that they were quite used to in that pagan culture. And I think I'm feeding back a little bit. Turn this down just a tad. These mics can be sensitive. See if that's a little bit better. Can you still hear me? So let's see. So anyways, for some reason, this Belteshazzar had not known about Daniel. And so here he is, he's questioning Daniel as to who he is, I guess, and more or less. And I might take you back to, and what's interesting about this is you would think that any father-grandson relationship, you would have thought that, not exactly sure how old this man was when Nebuchadnezzar died, but you would think that the stories of Nebuchadnezzar would have gone down through time and would have gotten to this grandson, but it didn't seem to. But as a reminder, over in Daniel 4, 8, and 9 is where we reflect back to, but at last Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and before him I told the dream. This is reflecting back to when Nebuchadnezzar was remembering back to the time when he had first learned about Daniel. O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubles thee, tell me the vision of my dream that I have seen and the interpretation thereof. This was talking about, I put this in here only to remind us that Nebuchadnezzar definitely knew who Daniel was, and that and that he was an interpreter of dreams. And also jumping down to verse 18. The dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had seen, now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation. But thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. So again, I'm just pointing out refreshing our memories a little bit on what Nebuchadnezzar knew of Daniel, and it's kind of interesting that Belshazzar doesn't really know that much about him. Jumping into the New Testament for a second, just as a reference for talking about gods. Paul here is talking about, for though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father of whom all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom all are things, and we by him. So Paul here is just reflecting the idea that that many cultures had many gods, and that and pointing out that there's one true God. Okay, let's get back to Daniel. I think I set this part up pretty good. It's been a few weeks since we've been teaching, so I wanted to try to review a little bit. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, and they should read the writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. I have heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, there shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold round thy neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. I had pointed out last week, too, about this third ruler in the kingdom. I just thought I'd quickly remind us what we found out about that, is that many believed up to this point that Daniel was a false teaching, because nobody could find this Belshazzar in other readings, other documentation, historical documents, until they found what became known as the Nebuchadnezzar stone. And on this stone, they discovered that Nebuchadnezzar was the actual king of this period of time, and he makes reference of his son, Belshazzar, and how he helped share the kingdom. So this Nebuchadnezzar was kind of like an absent king, because he kind of put his son in charge of Babylon, and he was off doing all kinds of different things. And so that's where Belshazzar is actually like a regent of Babylon. So that's why he wasn't even able to give Daniel anything more than third in the kingdom, because there was actually two above. There was Belshazzar, which is second in command, and then his father, who was the actual king of Babylon at that time. So on to Daniel 5:17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. I found this rather interesting, that Daniel was never afraid to stand up for what he believed, being a Jew, and what he felt. He didn't want any gifts, because anything that came from God was something that was not to gain monetarily for. And I might point out a couple other places that we see this in the Bible. In Genesis 14:22 and 23. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from thee a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou should say, I have made Abram rich. Also over in 2 Kings 5:15 and 16. And he returned to the man of God. This is talking about, this is a period of time where Elijah was helping out someone, and that man wanted to come back and help and give something for helping this man get healed. and Elijah turned it down because he didn't want something that a gift of God to gain monetarily on it. So finishing up here, he and all his company and came and stood before him and said, "Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel now therefore I pray thee take a blessing of thy servant." But he said, and that would be Elijah speaking, "As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none." And he urged him to take it, but he refused. I think it's a kind of a good teaching to realize, too, that the gifts we receive from God, that we shouldn't expect anything monetarily for them. And that I'd like to, and I see that in Daniel, too, and I just want to kind of point that out. One more verse here in Acts 8:20. But Peter said unto him, "The money perish with thee, because thou hast thought that the gift of God may be purchased with money." And this is another period of time where somebody wanted to try to gain because of his abilities with God. And here Peter was pointing that out. This was that Simon. He was someone who noticed that Peter had healed, and he wanted that power. And Peter said that some money would not buy this kind of power. So back to Daniel 5:18. "O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor." Well, now Daniel's going to have a little bit of a dig here, because now he's going to point out the things that Belteshazzar is doing wrong, and why this writing has been put on the wall in the first place. And I'm mainly going to point out a couple of things, because I think that the one thing I can say positively about Nebuchadnezzar is the fact that he never disrespected the God of Daniel, as he always put it. And I think at the end, Nebuchadnezzar actually, it became his God also. I wouldn't be surprised to see Nebuchadnezzar when we get to heaven. Based on chapter 4, if you remember, he was taught a valuable lesson by God. But either way, I want to kind of show that Daniel is going to point out here that some of the things that Belteshazzar is doing is disrespecting God, even if you don't believe in him. Probably not wise to disrespect him. And I wanted to point out a couple other places. In Jeremiah 27:5-7, "I have made the earth, the man, the beast that are upon the ground, but my great power and by my outstretched arm have given it unto whom it seemed meet unto me. And now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. My servant and the beasts of the field have I given him also to serve him. And all nations shall serve him, and his son and his son's son." This is the reason I'm bringing this verse up, as it actually makes a comment here about the fact that the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar will be in charge also, and this would be Belteshazzar. "Until the very time of the land come, and then many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of him." I want to take us back to the Daniel 2 for a little refresher on something I think applies here also. In 37 and 38, "Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory." Here Daniel is recognizing the same thing, probably remembering that he read it in Jeremiah. "And whosoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven, have he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all, that thou art this head of gold." This is again, this is the interpretation of the first dream of the four metals of the beast: the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the legs of iron. Just pointing out again that Nebuchadnezzar was given this ability from God, and I think Nebuchadnezzar recognized that at the end, but it seems like that didn't flow down to his grandson, because his grandson is just basically mocking God in this scenario. Over in Daniel 4:17, I think is when Nebuchadnezzar started to realize that God was as powerful as he was. This matter is by the decree of the watchers and a demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and set up it over in the basis of men. That was Nebuchadnezzar actually speaking. And so he's starting to realize exactly who God is. And that I guess I'm pointing this stuff out because I often wondered why his grandson didn't seem to know this stuff. And his grandmother had pointed this stuff out to him too, also in our prior lesson last week. Okay, back to Daniel 5:19. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, whom he would not slew, and whom he would not keep alive, and whom he would set up, and whom he would put down. Here Daniel's talking about the fact that God is in charge of rising up nations and falling nations. And he's getting ready to tell him exactly what this handwriting on the wall is, and it ain't good for him. I want to point out too, back in Daniel 2:12 and 13. I'm trying to remember why I put this in here. Stand by 1 second. I think that was an error. Skip ahead. Back to Daniel 5:20. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne and took his glory from him. I just wanted to pop back to Daniel 4:30 and 37. Talking about his heart lifted up in pride, and talking a little bit about pride and how Nebuchadnezzar himself was brought down due to his pride. Over in 4:30, the king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and by the hour of my majesty? This is a point that God said, okay, Nebuchadnezzar, I've had enough with you, and I'm going to teach you a lesson. And this is when he went crazy, and this is Nebuchadnezzar's account of what happened in retrospect. Jumping down to verse 37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment. And those that walk in pride he is able to abase. So here Nebuchadnezzar actually realizes his error and trying to be too proud about what he accomplished, and not realizing it was because of God that it was accomplished. And again, I'm doing all this mainly to try to point out that why didn't his son know this, or grandson? So it just goes to show that sometimes we can try our very hardest to raise our children in the admiration of the Lord, but it doesn't always work. Everybody has to find the Lord on his own terms. Back to Daniel 5:21. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild asses, and they fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he will. Again, this is still Daniel talking. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knowest all this. So all I've been leading up to is that verse there, is the fact that even Daniel said, why didn't you know this? But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and thou hast brought the vessels of the house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver, and of gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is. And whose are all thy ways hast thou not glorified? So a couple of verses talking about pride. They're all through the Bible, but I just pick out a couple that I thought were really appropriate for this lesson. Over in Isaiah 37:23. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed? And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice, and lifted up thine eyes on high, even against the Holy One of Israel? Over in Ezekiel 28:2. Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am God, I sit in the seat of God, in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man and not God. Thou that set thine heart as the heart of God. This is jumping down to verse 5. By the great wisdom and by the traffic hast thou increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches. Again, pride is always something that always gets us in trouble. And jumping down to verse 17 of Ezekiel 28, thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. This is actually more of a prophecy about Satan himself and how he, because of pride, has now tried to become a god himself. But I was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. That's actually God speaking through Ezekiel about Satan. And great lessons on pride, including Nebuchadnezzar. So we're going to see it again here with his grandson. And going back to Daniel, verse 24. This was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. Okay, you see a little diagram up there. These paintings, for those that aren't familiar with it, is from a artist up in that Pastor Silcott knows of, and he likes to try to help people understand the Bible by making paintings. That gives a visual effect of different biblical, and he so happened he did a Daniel one, and so this is the point in time we're at. So you can see here in the picture on the side there, what you saw before that is when Belteshazzar and all his kings and all his people drinking out of the gold cups you see there, and the writing on the wall, the hand coming out of the wall. And then we're on a portion on the right side of that painting where Daniel is going to explain. I might mention, too, that this is way later in Daniel's life. They figure he was probably somewhere around 80 to 90 years old. And he's still got a little bit more ministry to go, because Cyrus is going to be coming in the scene here in a few minutes. And that he's going to also work for Cyrus. But at the end of this chapter, Belshazzar will be eliminated by Cyrus's troops, who right at this moment are in Babylon, taking over the city. But kind of a nice little visual representation there of what the writing on the wall was. And I'll try to explain it as best I can. Verse 25. And this is the writing that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. And this is the interpretation of the thing. God had numbered thy kingdom and finished it. And basically that in a more secular way of saying your number is up, or your goose is cooked is probably a better way of saying it. God has basically put an end to your kingdom. Verse 27. Tekel, thou art weighted in the balances and art found wanting. Basically, you've come up short. You did not pass the test. Verse 28. Perez, the kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So at this point in time, where Cyrus's army is actually in the city, taking it over. Quite a fascinating way how they did it, too, because it's interesting that Belshazzar here is having a party. He doesn't even realize that his city is being overrun by the Medes and Persians. But Cyrus was quite an intelligent leader of the army, and the way he did it is that if you saw Babylon, the basic setup of Babylon, that the river Euphrates ran right through the middle of it. And what Cyrus had done is way upriver, he had diverted the water away from and slowly allowed the water to kind of lower and level to a level where his men could walk into the city in the river. The river is pretty large. It's if you ever saw a picture of it, maybe I should have grabbed the picture. Quite a large river. It's back in that time frame, they figure it was probably and represent almost close to what the Mississippi River would be like for us. And it was quite deep and quite high, and there was actually gates that blocked it. It came into the city, but there was like fencing to keep people from being able to come into the city via boats and stuff on the river. But what Cyrus's troops did is that they diverted enough water away from it that they actually caused the water level to drop low enough to where his troops could just walk into the city in shallow water and actually take over the city without firing a shot, pretty much. And here the king is having a party. Everybody's getting drunk and having a good old time, and Cyrus is about ready to enter the throne room here, and basically at the end of this, Belshazzar is killed, and Cyrus takes over the city for the Medes and Persians. So finishing up here, verse 29, then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That third ruler again. And that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And I didn't expect to quite get done this quickly. But this is all I had for today. So let's end with a word of any questions? Anybody got any comments or interesting things that they got from this? Okay. Somebody want to close in prayer? Is anyone out there?
I'll close it up there.
Okay.
Almighty God, blessed be your great and mighty name. And Lord, we love to learn about these things in history. Unfortunately, our universities tell us about half of the story. And we look into your word because it's true and it will forever stand. And we can connect the true dots of history and learn from these things. And not only from a historical perspective, but to see that when you lay prophecies out for the world, they come true and they stand. And we can look back and our faith grows from that, including this king here. We especially love the book of Daniel because in these last days, you have told us this book is going to be sought after. And it really is starting to come to light. Even
Amen.
Folks that aren't Christians are starting to turn their head and say, how can it be that you've called all these kingdoms in the book of Daniel, and these kingdoms have come upon the earth hundreds and sometimes thousands of years ahead of time. So we thank you, we love you for this study. Thank you for helping Brother Dana put it together. And thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.